Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and once again it is time for the Q&As. I'm going to go ahead and green screen these today because you guys may not want to look at a green background. The other room, I normally do these in the living room's cluttered with a bunch of my girlfriend's work in there at the moment. So I'm going to go ahead and do them in my office in here, and you guys probably don't want to look at a green wall, so we'll just keep this in green screen mode. Oh, and also, by the way, guys, I didn't really get any good PED questions this week that I could see looking through the questions that I got, so it's all going to be 10 normal fitness questions and then one somewhat personal and philosophical question at the end. So let's get this started. First question. Do gadgets like fat grips help at all? Obviously not when deadlifting, but would it weaken your grip? But would it help during bicep curls, for example, or similar to not keeping the wrist straight when curling? All right, fat grips are a gimmick, guys. The whole thing with the fat grips is that, yeah, bigger grips can help train your grip strength. So that's why they have axle bars. That's why they have thicker bars for training on some of your big compound lifts. That's why strongman use them. That's why power lifter use them, is to increase your grip strength because it's harder to grip a bigger bar. But using them to try to help with other exercises, absolutely not. The truth is it does the exact opposite of what you want. It's a really bad idea. It's another gimmick for you guys to throw your money away on, because when you're gripping an object, usually the harder that you grip something or the more that you can engage your core, the more neural activation you get, the more neuromuscular activation you get, the more muscle fibers you can usually recruit. So actually gripping something really, really tight, as long as it doesn't change the bar path. Like, for example, if you're gripping a bar when you're pressing or curling or anything else, and you're out here, it's only doing this that might make it more difficult as far as activating the bicep on a curl. But by keeping your wrist back, it helps a little bit with the tension on the bicep, for example. But a looser grip doesn't help you at all. Gripping something really tight, in general, makes you stronger. So you should always be trying to grip something as hard as you possibly can if you're trying to recruit a muscle, as long as you're not focused entirely on the grip itself and actually moving the weight and using the muscles you're supposed to be using. But the fat grips really just make it more difficult to grip. It's not really going to help you in any way with muscle fiber activation, so I don't really know what the whole point of these is, other than to just sell gimmicky items that make an exercise more difficult because it's more difficult for you to grip something. I don't know. I'm not really sure what they're supposed to do outside of just have you spend money in terms of what they do, because you're going to, but I can't see any possible benefit to using a bigger grip like that on isolation movements. I don't see what it would possibly do for recruiting the smaller muscles or help you in any way. It just doesn't make any sense. Again, just another gimmick. All right, next question. In a recent video, you said 9 sets on a muscle group a week is enough volume for a natty to gain muscle. How do you determine how much volume is enough? No, I said 9 sets, if done correctly, is more than enough for you to gain about as much muscle as you're possibly going to gain. Actually, 1 set is enough. If you do 1 set and you stimulate enough metabolic fatigue off of a single set on an exercise, you will stimulate growth. As long as there is progressive overload and there is metabolic fatigue or enough tension to stimulate adaptation, you will grow off of a single set. So really what it comes down to for the drug-free lifter, more volume produces less growth with every sequential set than the set before did. Frequency usually does more for the drug-free lifter than volume does. So higher frequency with less volume, that gives you the same weekly volume. If you do the same amount of work spread out through the week over more days with less volume per day as a drug-free lifter, you'll usually gain more muscle mass. Might not be twice as much, it won't be massively more, but it will be a little more. You'll make slightly better gains. So it's not the issue of how much is enough. 1 difficult set is enough, and if you do it at a high enough frequency, you will be able to achieve maximum growth, because here's the point. 1 set can probably stimulate about 80% of the possible gains you could get in a muscle from a single workout. Everything beyond that, you're trying to get that last 20% or so. But if you do so at the expense of reducing frequency because of recovery time, you actually gain slightly less muscle as a result of it. If you can do it at a high frequency and train really, really frequently and only stimulate 70 or 80% of the muscle gains you could have stimulated, you end up with more net growth per week and per month that way. So really, it's kind of a tricky question, but the thing is, you can stimulate growth off of a single set. In fact, you can stimulate significant growth off of a single set that doesn't actually go to failure in many cases. It's a matter of, are you stimulating enough fatigue and Is there progressive overload there? If so, you're going to grow off of it. So that's a point people forget, is that it's all these things aren't necessary for growth. People are doing a lot of things trying to squeeze out a little more growth, but simple progressive overload with enough metabolic fatigue can absolutely cause growth off of one set. Not to say that you can't gain also off of 16 sets or 20 sets, but the point is that how much is enough? Anything that allows progressive overload and fatigues you will cause growth, period. Not even a point that you can debate against. The evidence is overwhelming on that. All right, next question. What do you think of doing strictly dips, pull-ups, handstand variations with added weight or harder variations, coupled with deadlift and squats for strength and hypertrophy? For someone that finds those exercises much more enjoyable and fun, I don't have any problem with that. I think that's a fantastic way to go. And for me, the only reason I'm not doing something like that was, one, I was competing in powerlifting before, and two, now I have a bunch of weak points I need to balance out. But once I'm more balanced out, if I don't plan on doing another meet, a whole lot of my training will probably be oriented in that direction. I'll go back to just exercises that I think are very functional for athletics, which is going to be push presses, deadlifts, front squats, things like that. And I'm probably just going to start doing a lot of weighted body weight movement. So actually what you're suggesting is a type of training I like for overall general fitness, for overall strength training, and hypertrophy is a side effect of that, because if you get stronger, you subject yourself to workload, progressive overload, you're going to get bigger. I really like the idea of that. The only issue you run into with that is that depending upon your genetics, you might not be totally balanced. You might need to do some extra work to balance things out for you personally. But in terms of overall strength, athleticism, things like that, all those weighted body weight movements combined with deadlifts and squats is a fantastic way to train. And as a general rule, I recommend that everyone do some type of training, but the type of training that you enjoy might not always be ideal, but if you enjoy it enough to continue to do it for many, many years, that's probably going to be your best bet. So when you tell me something like this is just funner for you, you enjoy training that way, then I think you're kind of a double win at that point, because if you're going to do it consistently for the next 20 years because you just like doing it, it's going to improve your quality of life and health and longevity and everything else. So yeah, by all means, get on it. Keep doing what you're doing in that case. All right, next question. If someone was running a modest deficit of 10% while running the cutting version of your novice program and added in about 3 days of about 5 to 30-second sprints a week for cardio, would that hinder recovery too much? Yeah, I'm going to say it will. And the reason is sprinting is going to be high intensity cardio. You do not want to do maximum intensity cardio on a high frequency squatting program. 3 sets of 5 with relatively heavy weights that are over 80% of your max isn't as brutal as 5 sets of 5, but 3 sets of 5 done 3 times a week, you're not going to have the recovery unless you're genetically gifted or you're on drugs to handle high intensity cardio on the off days. It is going to inhibit your recovery. You might stall and find yourself regressing a little bit. I mean, you can give it a try, but don't get too upset if it doesn't work out for you and you start regressing at that point. That is a very difficult way to go. I usually recommend that people stick with lower intensity steady state or more moderate cardio on their off days if they're going to run my 5x5 program, even if it's the cutting version, and particularly for weight loss. You might find yourself buried due to lack of food. So no, I'm going to recommend you not do that, because you're squatting near maximum workload still 3 days a week. High intensity cardio is going to be problematic. There are other programs that you could run out there if that's what you really want to do. Not mine. All right, next question. Hey Jason, I'm an intermediate lifter. I've recently somewhat injured my lower back while deadlifting. I managed to get up 185 for 5 reps without noticing any back pain, but at 180 kilos, my gym forced me to put mats underneath the plates because apparently the bang after my eccentric is too loud and distracting. I didn't put his whole question because I don't want to fill up. I run out of space in the bottom with too many questions. It won't let me post limitless amounts of stuff underneath where I put the timestamps. All right, this is stuff I get all the time, and what I want to reiterate to you guys, if you have a back injury, if you have any sort of injured back and you've talked to your doctor when he's talked to a doctor, or you haven't talked to a doctor, either way, do not come to the internet. Do not come to YouTube. Don't ask me. Don't ask Chris Jones. Don't ask CT Fletcher. Don't ask Cali Muscle, Omar Issoff, anyone else for advice on your injured back. If they give you advice about your back injury, I'm going to have to honestly say maybe YouTube should look into that and delete the video where they do that, because that is extremely dangerous For a person to give you personal advice on a back injury who isn't qualified is a sports physical therapist who specializes in sports and athletic people, a physical therapist who has a degree in physical therapy and sports rehab, who hasn't seen all of your MRIs and x-rays personally. For that person to give you advice on a back injury is extremely irresponsible. And any of you asking a YouTuber for advice on your back injury are absolutely asking to be crippled for the rest of your life. You actually probably want to be crippled if you're doing that. Do not take my advice. Do not take anyone else's advice off of YouTube over a back injury. Don't even ask. It's really, really bad idea. You could end up crippled for life as a result of taking their advice. None of us are qualified to give you this advice. Even if we had the credentials, we haven't seen your x-rays and MRIs. Therefore, we're unqualified to give you the advice even if we have the official credentials. So don't do it. All I'm going to say on that one. Next question. I've been lifting for about 5 years, but I cannot bench 100 kilos. I weigh 75 kilograms and my squat and deadlift max are about 142 and 180 kilos respectively. Are these numbers okay according to my body weight for a drug-free recreational lifter? Also, what program would you suggest for me if I want to increase my strength and hypertrophy? Thanks. No, you're pretty much around the end of where my novice program should have people at 1 year, but don't let that deter you. Oh, and for people who don't know what this means, basically, guys, 140 kilos is 3 plates a side, 180 kilos is 4 plates a side, 100 kilos is 2 plates a side. For people who are using the standard system and don't know metric yet, which is going to be pretty rare at this point, but I have a mostly American audience right now. And it's 74 kilos, so you guys can do the math. The guy's probably in the 170s, 180 pound range. No, your lifts are a little below where they could be. However, you're a recreational lifter. Does it really matter? If you're gaining muscle, you're gaining strength, you're happy with your physique overall, happy with your health, I wouldn't stress it too much. Your bench is particularly lower than I would expect. I expect most guys to bench 100 kilos for reps at the end of, say, my novice program. But you know what? It doesn't matter if it's not bothering you that much. You're healthy, you're fit. If you can bench close to 100 kilos and you have these other lifts, you're going to be healthier and fitter than most people walking the street. You're stronger than most people walking around. Don't sweat it. If it becomes important to you because your bench seems to be the worst, because you're not proportionate with this squat and deadlift and a bench under 100 kilos. So I would recommend that you go on a bench intensive and overhead intensive program. Start doing variations of things. Start doing a lot more overhead pressing. Start doing a bit more tricep work. And I think that you'll find that your bench will come up from there. But that's the one that needs the most focus. If strength is important to you and you want more balanced strength, you do need a heavier bench press. But again, there's going to be some other weakness going on there. You probably have weak shoulders or something. So overhead pressing, a heavy focus on that for a while. Or just go on a dedicated bench program of some type. There are tons of them out there, and that should help sort that out. But honestly, it's not that big of a deal. Yes, you're below my strength standards for someone at the 5-year mark, but you're almost at my novice standards for the first year, which will put you in the top 1% of the population walking the earth. So if you're just purely recreational and this is just fun, fitness, and a hobby, it's just not that big of a deal. You're still doing better than 99% of the population. All right, next question. Hi Jason, I am currently on your beginners 5x5 program. I work long night shifts 5 times a week and often have to do my workout directly after I finish in the morning. If I am exhausted, should I still try and add weight, or is it okay to repeat the same weight occasionally? Thanks. No, it's never okay to just vary from the program. If you can't handle the program the way it's written due to your lifestyle, that's why I have other programs. The novice program is intended for people who have the free time and the recovery and the lifestyle to allow for the novice program. It is the single most brutal first 1 to 2 year lifter programs I have out there. It is a brutal program. It is very difficult. It is very difficult to recover from. Some people genetically cannot do so. So if your lifestyle, because you work late night long shifts, doesn't allow for you to run the program as it's written, I have other programs. I would probably recommend that for you personally, you go run the linear hypertrophy program that I have instead. Don't try to run the novice 5x5 if you work strange shift work that's going to interfere with your recovery, because this program is going to bury you in the long term in that case. So no, it's not okay to try to run it if you can't recover from it properly due to your lifestyle, your career, and still make the progress on the program how it's written. It's not going to work for you. Run one of the slightly milder ones like the linear hypertrophy program. That's going to be my recommendation. All right, next question. A lot of fish Oil supplements recommend 1 to 3 capsules a day. Aren't those recommendations for people who do not work out? Should someone who works out take more capsules? And if so, how much would be enough to give results? All right, guys. Quick primer on the fish oil. 1 to 3 capsules a day has been found to be enough in studies to improve health markers over the years. There's probably no need for most people to go over that. We've seen benefits at up to 6 in studies, 6 grams of fish oil a day, assuming that's 30% EPA and DHA, but we've not seen benefits going beyond that. At about 10 grams a day, we start to see negative health markers. So remember, this is something that's helpful to you in small amounts, harmful to you in large amounts. This whole idea that people always come up with, that people who work out or lift recreationally who aren't full-time athletes need different micronutrients and macronutrients sometimes than other people, like basic things like vitamins, minerals, sometimes even essential fatty acids. This idea that they need more or will benefit from more than the average person isn't always true. That's a myth that the supplement industries and people in it have pushed onto you. It's not necessarily true. You don't necessarily need more vitamin C or more EPA or more vitamin D just because you lift weights. The needs of endurance athletes oftentimes change your need for certain things. Endurance athletes, but you guys aren't endurance athletes if you just work out. If you're a recreational lifter who goes and lifts weights 3 or 4 times a week and does a little cardio, but you're not doing hours and hours of training, odds are your needs other than calorie needs and maybe protein needs are not going to be that different from a sedentary person. It's, again, don't buy into the hype and think that you need more just because of that. But I would say that in general, you could do more fish oil than the 1 to 3 grams because there have been health marker improvements in some people going up to 6, but not any higher than that. There's no reason to ever take more than 6 grams of fish oil a day because, again, at 10, we notice that it can start to compromise immune system. So, but the thing is, you should see some benefits with 1 to 3 grams a day. That's what all the data out there I've seen over the years suggest. It may not be worth it to go over that to you. Just remember, no more than 6 ever. There's no point in it, no benefit, and going much beyond that can actually harm your health in the long term. And stop buying into this idea that just because you lift weights that you suddenly need more of certain nutrients you may not actually need outside of just calories and protein. All right, next question. At what level of delusion and body dysmorphia one should seek help from a therapist? That is the normal inherent whim bodybuilders have, and when does it get pathological? There's not really a fine line on that because it's such a gray area there. Honestly, most people who work out seriously, most people who are going to watch fitness YouTube channels every day probably have a small amount of body dysmorphia. They probably have a small amount of delusion associated with that. Body dysmorphia is a delusion in and of itself. I'm going to say that if you're at the point to where you're spending $100 or $200 a month on supplements and you're not a serious competitive athlete, or you're probably considering seriously going on steroids yet when your income or competitive endeavors in no way depend upon it, it might be time to consider getting therapy at that point. If you're at the point to where you're seriously upset when you've been working out and you're in better shape than the average person walking down the street, you're not competitive in anything, you're not a serious competitive bodybuilder, physique competitor, serious competitive athlete, and you get genuinely distressed and it affects your ability to function or have any sort of normal social life, you're having to follow weird eating schedules, and it's interfering with either your career or your social life or giving you daily stress, it upsets you. When you look in the mirror and see what you're looking at, then it might be time to consider therapy at that point, because that is pathological at that point. When it actually causes you distress in your day-to-day life instead of happiness and joy, and there's not some financial incentive to do differently, it's pathological at that point. It's time to maybe consider talking to a therapist or a counselor at that point. I would say that that's the point where it's reached. But most people who are going to be in this audience have at least a very small amount of body dysmorphia, but it doesn't have to be a serious pathology just because you have some body dysmorphia. It has to be at a point where it's interfering with your life or causing you actual distress before it becomes pathological. Or it's costing you a very significant amount of money that might be interfering in some way with your life. All right, next question. Possible causes of the squat being stronger than the deadlift. I know you've covered this before, but I'm 100% raw, no belt, no wraps, nothing. I train both with pretty much the same frequency, deadlifts being even higher focus at the point. Not that I neglect it, but somehow my max deadlift is at best the same as my squat. Note the low bar squat when attempting maxes, though. I'm pretty short, 5'7", but I believe my proportions are rather unusual. Well, that is pretty unusual. You might want to look into your depth on the squat, because normally, particularly with no belt and no wraps, your squat should be significantly lower, because obviously wraps don't really help with the deadlift much. They help a lot with the squat. Belt helps with both, but it helps the squat significantly more than the deadlift. So guys who usually squat as much as they deadlift are usually belted and wrapped up. So in your case, it could be a case of either your grip strength is an issue, your upper back strength could be an issue, or it could be that you're not squatting nearly as deep as you think you are. The first thing I would check is your squat depth. Get over to the side, set up a camera next to you at the side when you do your heaviest sets on your squats and see if you're reaching parallel or not. If you're not reaching parallel and you're squatting high, that is the actual reason. And for most people who haven't actually set up a camera and checked from the side, they don't actually know what a full depth squat looks like. A lot of guys, and that's why a lot of people, when I did the Rob Riches video and other things, people are like, he's not squatting high, when actually he was 6 to 8 inches above parallel. So a lot of people are thinking from a front view that they see in the mirror or other things that that's parallel, when they're actually 6 or 8 inches above, even reaching normal parallel, not even going below parallel or ass to grass. So in your case, your low bar squat might actually be a lot higher than you think it is until you check from the side. If you check from the side and it is sufficiently deep, you just need to put more focus on the deadlift, find your weak links in the deadlift and work on those. And it could very much be an issue of either upper back strength, thoracic strength, or an issue of your grip holding you back, in which case those are easily fixable with accessory work. All right, next question and last question of the week, and this one is very much going to be kind of political, philosophical in nature. And I obviously have strong, unusual opinions, and I think people are used to that at this point. What is your opinion on national service? Does every man have the duty to serve his country? Do you think it would help combat the pussification of Western men? Yeah, I think the pussification of Western men is a serious issue. Do I think this is a possible solution because we've been so pussified and giving out award trophies and all of this stuff to where men are forgetting how to be men, and we are becoming weak, and it is going to force it. We're pretty much going to be conquered at some point because of this in the near future if we don't kind of set things straight. Do I think this is a possible solution? Yes, I think if most men in Western countries had to do some sort of national service, at least National Guard or something for a year or two when they turn 18, it would probably combat this a lot. I think a better solution, though, it's kind of a point I've always believed in, is that when you look at the way the original U.S. was set up, it was set up as an oligarchy. That's what people don't understand. There was basically a ruling class among the normal citizens who had the full rights. Not everyone else had it. Now, I'm not suggesting anything absurd as taking rights away from minorities or women, because we as a society have progressed to a point to where we understand that women are people. People of different skin colors and ethnicities are all still people. They all still have the same potential for intelligence and rational thinking and everything else. That wasn't fully understood then. Now that we understand that, it's scientifically speaking, we know that. So it's fair to say, okay, we can't set that sort of discrimination in place. But this idea that we are giving all citizens fully equal rights and giving them full citizenships purely based upon the fact that they're born here and they reach a certain legal age might be part of our issues that we have in this country, because not everyone in these Western countries feels the same duty and obligation towards society, towards their nation, things like that. And that becomes a problem when you basically have people who do contribute massively to society. They're strong contributing members of society, maybe love their country, they love their society, and they try to give back to it. They work full time. When they have the same voting rights and ability to have a say in the society as a person who's sitting on welfare and benefits full time, doesn't pay any taxes, doesn't contribute anything to society in any way, doesn't help his community in any way, isn't even prepared to defend his nation or neighborhood in any way, to give them the same voting rights is probably not beneficial to our society. To give him the same equal say in the way things are done in society, and a society that he doesn't really contribute to, probably isn't reasonable in the grand scheme of things. So something like a national service to be one of the pathways to give you full rights to citizenship, which I think if anyone's read the Starship Troopers novel or series of novels, that author creates a lot of philosophy based around that. Then it might very much change the way that we do things in society. We might actually benefit in the long term to return in the United States, at least. I can't always speak for everything in Europe, to at least a slight oligarchy again in that regard of just being born in a place that you don't contribute to in any meaningful way, that you don't believe in any meaningful way, to be given the same amount of say in how that society is then run. I don't know, maybe something that we should consider. I'm not even saying it should be that way, just philosophically something to consider there. And would national service, meaning someone who did go do their 2 years in just the National Guard or something as a young man or a young woman, would that potentially help with that situation? And then they're the ones who get the full voting rights. They get the full access to everything, the ability to run for a political office, the ability to vote, things like that. People who've contributed in some way to the society. It might change the way that we look at life, and it might strengthen us as a society. And I think it would definitely help with the pussification of Western males these days. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.